So there's a lot of faces out there. And I wasn't nervous until all of you are now staring at me. So I've gone through this a couple times, but forgive me if I look like I'm reading, because I got notes here, so that would mean I'm reading. But anyway, ooh, it's got feedback. Is that bad?
You just don't stand that close to that one.
Yeah, just kind of back.
Here, let's just scoot you away.
I need my notes.
How about that? Try
Is that better?
Yeah.
That's better?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when I first heard that the topic was flow, I thought, great. I love flow. I love being in flow. Oh, I gotta figure out how to push this button. I love to be in flow when all the work seems like it's going smoothly, all the pieces are falling into place, things are coming together perfectly. Of course, I can talk about flow. But then, I had a couple of super busy weeks, and I run a small business, like Laura Lee said, and I try to keep a production schedule and to keep myself on track, but things come up every day. They interrupt what I'm doing, but in reality, they're actually not necessarily interruptions. They're just things that need to happen so that I can keep my business sustainable or take care of my kids, whatever it is that comes up. So then I thought, oh no, really? I don't know anything about flow. My week was crazy. Everything was in chaos. And I realized that it's also actually really hard to get that feeling of when you're working, feeling like you're flowing and the ideas are coming and nothing else is interrupting you. But when I was a young designer, I started to think about the difference between then and now. So when I was a young designer, it kind of felt like a switch that I could turn on and I could turn off. But I thought about my responsibilities, and my responsibilities were to go into a meeting, get the assignment, go back to my desk, and work. Occasionally I had to answer the phone, but that was pretty much it. And then I had to take the stuff that I had done, take it into my bosses, my creative directors, show them, present it to them, and they would take it to the clients. Fast forward 20 years. And this is how flow feels now. It does not switch on and off as easily as it used to. I am a wife. I have 2 teenagers. I run a business. I have a house. All those responsibilities that we all have that distract us from what we think is our optimum flow state and getting to the good work. So these days, I feel like flow is actually kind of elusive. But then I told myself, I can talk about flow. All I need to do is approach this like any creative project. Start with research. So I asked the Googles. And this, I don't know if you can see it, but it says how to be a unicorn. I didn't ask the Googles that. I asked the Googles, what is flow? And the first thing I found one of the first things I found was this quote from Bruce Lee. It really, really made me stop and think. So does everybody know who Bruce Lee is? He's a Chinese martial artist. He said, "Be like water making its way through the cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle and it becomes the bottle. You put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." So this is what I think about when I think about how Bruce Lee flows. But when I think about how I flow, it feels more like this. Or like this one. Both of them have water involved, but I don't think that's what Bruce intended. So these moments of the fish slapping us in the face, they happen to all of us. We are working and then we get an email. And for me personally, I get an email and a new font has come out from my favorite font house. And I'm like, ooh, I gotta go look at that. Or some article comes in and it tells me how to be a better parent or a better at my job or how to better run a business or whatever it is. Or I get a text or I get a call. It doesn't matter. We feel like this all day long. So then I continued in my research. And I watched a TED Talk. It's a good one. It's about, it's by this guy. His name, the first name is pronounced Mihai, and I'm not even going to attempt the second, or his last name. But it's about flow as the secret to happiness. And what Mihai talks about, remember his name because I bring him up a few times, but what Mihai talks about is how our nervous systems can actually only process so much at once. So we can process about 110 bits per second. And here when I'm talking to you, I'm taking up about 60 of your bits per second. So that's why we can really only kind of concentrate on 2 conversations at once. Beyond that, we're toast. We're not in focus anymore. So he also talks about how flow is when we're totally immersed and our brain is consumed. We aren't actually able to think about hunger. We can't think about time. We can't think about the argument we had with our spouse or our kid or whoever this morning. All we are doing is focusing on what we're working on right now. And the rest of the world just kind of disappears. So then he gives this example of a composer. And the composer is describing how he feels when he is in his flow state. And he says that when he's doing his thing, his hand seems to just sort of take over and kind of move on its own. And he doesn't even have to think about what he's doing. Now, Mihai, he said that he's a psychologist, if I didn't say that, but he said that he could look at his hands for hours and he would never marvel at his own hands because that's just not part of his makeup. So then he also talked about how a poet finds flow. They described that to him. And a figure skater described how they find flow, and a CEO. And after I was listening to all of these different descriptions, I kind of had an epiphany that flow is actually defined differently for everyone. People in the branding or design or advertising marketing industry, we have our own special version of flow. So then I asked myself, well, maybe what I'm doing is I'm thinking about flow all wrong, thinking about how I can't access flow anymore, and that's just the wrong way to look at it, or how it's more difficult. So this brings me to a conversation that I recently had with a friend. This is going to seem like I'm off on a tangent wandering, but I'm not. I have a point. Come back to it. He's a brand strategist, and he was recently diagnosed with cancer. And when he was describing to me and some colleagues or telling us about his diagnosis, he's like, cancer really needs a rebrand. And I started laughing because, of course, this person who I respect for all his wisdom in brand strategy would say that cancer needs a rebrand. But to his point, the C word is super scary, but it's because we immediately go to devastation. And his point was that not all cancers are devastating. There's many diagnoses with an extremely positive outlook, and his included. So we didn't have to feel one way if we could just think of it another way. So then I thought, well, maybe flow needs a rebrand. If we can shift the perception of flow, then maybe this ideal flow state that we all strive for could be less elusive and more approachable. So what is the brand of flow? Well, I made a list of some of its brand perceptions. So flow is, I don't know if you can see these, I'm going to read them. Flow is aspirational. It's something that we all would love to be able to achieve as often as possible because it makes the work better. To me, it's smooth and calm. Even saying the word flow just kind of flows out your mouth. It's focused. We have a goal. It seems like it should be easy because flow just sounds like it goes. It's very productive. It's creative. It's valuable and precious. For me, in my grown-up creative life, it's fleeting, and it also is a bit elusive. So then, if we go back to Bruce Lee's quote again to see if we can shift these perceptions in this rebrand. When he says, be like water making its way through cracks, Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. So maybe what he meant by that is that we shouldn't have a preconceived notion of what flow is. And really, we should just instead experience it. I love him so much, I'm going to leave him there for just a second. All right, so, and when we think about flow as it relates to creatives, flow maybe is happening more than we think. It's just getting redirected as we navigate our day. If it gets interrupted like the spoon is doing here, the water still moves. The flow can even get chaotic, as you can see, but it goes around the interruption and it continues. And if we look at this one, flow actually doesn't have to mean easy. That little tornado thing right there, that's our ebb. It's the tornado of ideas before we connect the dots to get to the good stuff. So if we look at how we can shift the perceptions of flow, if we're flowing like water, the actuals of flow become aspirational, still the same. But instead of smooth and calm, it's actually dynamic. It's in motion, and sometimes it's even chaotic. It's still focused, but it's not always easy. It's productive, it's creative, it's valuable and precious always. But instead of being elusive, it's actually possibly more approachable than we think. And is it really fleeting? I don't know, but maybe for creatives, it's actually just a constant stream of creativity. And it bubbles along right beside us, and this is what we have as our privilege because we're in this industry that's creative, and not all people are. So it's bubbling along right beside us, and all we got to do is make space for ourselves to access the stream, or just hop in for the ride whenever we can. So well, now that you know what I know from Bruce Lee and from Mihai with the very long last name, how can we make space in our work life for more flow? We've adjusted some perceptions to make flow feel like it's right here, right next to us, instead of up here and hard to get to. And Mihai, with the very long last name, would say, how can we put more work in our flow channel? So now I'm going to give you a few of the strategies that I work with in terms of how I get to the work, making it the best it can be, and getting myself into that flow state. First one, shut it down. My friend John Arvizu, he sent me this podcast from NPR. It's called Hidden Brain, and it's very much related to this subject. They did an interview of this guy. He's a computer scientist. His name's Cal Newport. And it was about deep work, and I think he wrote a book too, but it's a good one if you have a chance to listen to it. But what they talk about is this notion of doing things one at a time anymore has become antiquated because we all feel very proud to say that we're multitasking. And what Cal says is that single tasking with that attitude of saying, I'm just going to check my inbox, I'm just going to check my phone, is not as single tasking as you think it is. Cal Newport says it's the switch itself that hurts, not how long you switch for. So he then talks about this study on attention residue. And basically when your attention is taken away, it takes you a minute to come back to think about what you were thinking about originally because you've got the residue of what you were distracted by. So they gave all these people this really hard puzzle. They distracted them briefly, and then they, however they measured it, there was a notable drop in performance when they returned to their task. And it was just a brief just check until they could ramp up again to the same level of thinking that they were originally engaged in. So he calls professions like ours knowledge work professions because we're using our brains to produce value for our clients. If our brains, and this is him asking this, not me, if our brains, this is a very good question, are how we make a living, are we making sure we get the best performance possible from our brains? Because actually, we owe it to the work to shut it down. He wonders, you know, if you're not optimizing your workflow environment, then what are you leaving on the table with every project? So he also talks about influential thinkers. And he said that influential thinkers have habits of going into hiding. And I love him too. J.K. Rowling, she would go to a suite in a hotel next to a castle in Edinburgh, so that all there had to be thought of was Harry Potter. Mark Twain had a cabin where he would go escape to. We can't all do these fancy escape acts to go into hiding, but we can do our very best to try and shut it down. When I was a creative director over at Fisher, my job was actually to invite people into my office all day, answer emails, answer questions. I had a revolving door. They were just trying to do their job. So yes, of course you can come in and we can talk. But my other part of my job was to also be a designer and make very cool things while being creative director. So I had to carve out time to work at 6 a.m. in the morning for a couple hours before anyone would come in. I'd work at lunch, I'd work after hours, but I did that for myself. I probably could have worked during the day when everything else was happening. But I knew that if I hadn't carved out time to actually focus, I wouldn't get to the good work. And I don't like working on things that I don't think is good work. I don't like working on things that suck. I don't like working on things that are medium. I like working on what I believe in and what I think is good work. So making time for better work to flow was how I got to the good work and got to do what I wanted to do and make what I wanted to make. So fast forward to now, I'm Smidge, and I don't have employees. I don't have anyone who can answer the phone if I check out. I don't have anyone who's doing any of the other work, answering whatever. So I still have to figure out ways to shut it down. So there are days that I leave the phone in the other room. I shut down my email and I go into what I call stealth mode. I actually even tell the clients that I've been working on a regular basis that I know might need to find me this week. I say, I'm going underground. If you need me and it's urgent, please feel free to call me. My phone's only, they don't know this, my phone's only in the other room. I will hear it if it rings. I also have this device that tells me what's happening. But I've never had a client get upset at me for saying that I'm going underground. Please call me if you have anything that's urgent, because I'm happy to help, but I'm working on a creative project and I just need to turn off all my distractions. There was something else I was going to say here. I forgot, but I think it was important. Oh, I also wanted to say, you also know yourself. You've carved out this space in your day to get to the good work. So know yourself and the environment that you work best in. If it's turning on music, whatever it is. John last couple months ago talked about how he has to work out. I do too. I actually, even today as Smidge, if I know I'm going to have a busy day, most days I wake up at 4:30, I go work out, I come back and I start working, or I get my kids off to school, but I know the environment that I need. When I start working on certain projects, I have a Scorpion Bay Marina out at Lake Pleasant. I turn on Roy Orbison when I work on that work. I listen to Sitting on the Dock at the Bay to get my head in the right space. Know yourself to know what puts you in that space if you've worked so hard to carve out this time. So, shut it down. If you get an email and you don't respond, they will text you. If you don't respond to that text, they will Instagram message you. If you don't respond to that, they will Facebook message you, or they'll find you on Google Hangouts, or they'll find you on Slack, whatever it is. There's so many ways to get a hold of us. If it's super important, someone will get a hold of you. And they won't stop till they find you. So shut it down to the best degree that you can within your own existence, and give your brain the space it needs to get to the good work. Next, how can we find flow? Embrace the ebb. So if we're flowing like water, and ebb and flow are phases of the tide, one truly can't exist without the other. So we need to actually get really, really good at embracing the ebb. So back to this visual right here, and that being our ebb. That vortex right there, that's our struggle, that's a creative process, that's getting the shit out, whatever it is. I thought if I stood over there it would get better. Getting the shit out, whatever it is. So we have to go through the ebb to get to the good work, and we have to embrace that process. I know that it takes me about 3 days to get to the good work. And I don't mean like 3 full days of working on something. I just mean by the time I can go through the brief, center myself, do some research, start thinking about it, takes a good probably 3 days to start being able to have sketches that I'm liking, have ideas that are coming together that are answering to what I'm trying to be doing. And I don't fight it, I plan for it. I make sure that I give myself those 3 days before I'm actually going to get to the good work. And I work those 3 days into my estimates in terms of that's part of my design phase. It's what makes the work what it is when people come to me and expect me to produce. And then after we struggle, we've poured our soul into whatever we're making, and we're going to go to this meeting with the client and we show the work and the client has changes. Holy shit. So, don't cry about it. There's no crying in this business. We are in a business. We work for clients. We love clients. If it wasn't for clients, we'd have no work. Embrace the fact, accept the fact that it's a collaboration. Your clients know their business. We know our business. We have to come together and meet in the middle. They're going to have an opinion every time. So we always talk about managing client expectations. Maybe we need to manage our own expectations a little bit in terms of just expecting there to have to be a conversation about moving the project forward. We're in the service industry. It's what we do. Because the first round is actually rarely ever the final round. If any of you have had a first round be your final round, then that's amazing. Sometimes the final round isn't even the final round. There's that joke where we can't even name our files final. And then you name it final. And I actually have stopped naming. I used to do that. And I used to get so mad because I was like, this was final. I stopped naming them final. I just number them, consecutive numbers. It doesn't really matter. It's always evolving. Even if you went back to the work 2 weeks later, a month later, a year later, you'd probably evolve it. And it would probably get better. So nothing's ever final. And we have to embrace the fact that it's not final. And we're not always going to make a hole in one. Or rarely we make a hole in one. Except that the struggle vortex may happen several times along the way in our flow. And get really good at embracing the ebb and don't let it slow your flow. This guy's pretty awesome. Next, how can we find flow? Don't compare. So nothing stops my flow faster than comparisonitis. I just heard that term recently, so I'm borrowing it. It's not my term. Comparisonitis. We need to not let that happen. Don't compare your work to anyone else's. It makes us feel any number of these emotions once we start to compare. And that's sabotaging yourself. If you've gotten really good at not sabotaging yourself, then that's amazing. But if you haven't, we owe it to ourselves to not do that. We say, wow, I could never do that. Or, oh my God, how did they get that client? Or what, how did they get that through? Don't do that. Because remember that you are the only person who can create your work. The team you're on right now, it's the only team that will create that thing that you're working on. And a different person would create a different result. A different team would create a different result. Personally, actually, what I do for myself to avoid, well, is there anyone in here, everyone's on social media, right? Or is there someone that's not? Because if you're not, that's amazing. So what I do for myself, actually, is I try to fill my experience, my visual experience, with people and professions that are completely different than my own. Of course, there's all these people that I respect that are in the same field, but I try to go along in the things that I'm looking at during the day. I try to look at things that have nothing to do with what I do. I love to look at fashion. I'm inspired by the patterns, and I find color palettes in fashion all the time. Textures, it even actually can translate to when you're trying to pick paper for a project. The textures that someone might put together with wool and silk, that's a smooth sheet and a rough sheet, and how they put that together. I also love to look at artists who have a completely different style than mine. And then what starts to happen, or even random stuff like this cake maker makes these amazing cakes with these really cool colors. And they even made a Pantone chip cake, which was a winner for me. So instead of feeling inadequate, I'm thinking, wow, that's really awesome. How can I even maybe try and work with that person someday? And I'm inspired by them instead of making myself feel bad. So remember, clients have hired you or hired your team based on the work and the results they've already seen you produce. So don't let comparison steal your flow. Next, and this one is actually probably my favorite one. Who got into this profession because that you're in right now? Because they thought it was fun. I did. And why did we think it was fun? Well, partly because we could do whatever we wanted when we started. We didn't have anyone to answer to. There was no brief. There was just an assignment that we got to make up. Continue to make this job fun for yourself. It is a business. We have to answer to the brief, check off all the boxes for the client, but we have to find a way to make the work fun or we're gonna get bored. Sorry, this is so feedbacky. So how do we make it fun? Bob Case, actually, he talked about at Design Week on Sunday, he talked about how he does passion projects. That's how he keeps himself inspired, and that's how he keeps things going. For me, personally, I actually try to put the passion project in the project. I try to create some sort of challenge for myself on each project, or try to learn something new on each project. One of my mantras that I always repeat to myself is that if I'm not having fun working on it, you're likely not having fun interacting with it. And the other thing that I always try to achieve for myself is to give my clients something that they never knew they always wanted. So I make sure that I'm either creating a challenge within each project or I'm learning something new so I stay interested in the work. When you have fun doing the work, people have fun looking at it. Clients actually, when you go to meetings, if you've created some sort of thing for yourself on the back end where you had to put some personal work into this project that they didn't even know about, when you're talking about it, that actually comes through in the meeting. It helps your meetings flow better. And it actually makes you sound more passionate about the project, and the client is more engaged in what you're talking about and liking what you're showing them. So in the end here, I'm going to show a little bit of work to show how I put the fun back in it. This is actually the first project that I did where I made up a little challenge for myself to figure out how to make this project fun. This is an annual report for Pinnacle West Capital Corporation. They are the owners of APS. And so they make sure that the lights turn on for us. It's an electric company. So my creative directors came. I know it's funny because of where we are, right? My creative directors came up with this idea that we were going to install a light bulb in the front cover of the annual, and every time the light bulb blinked, we were able to have it coincide with a statistic from the previous year. Well, these light bulbs, so the print run for this was like 85,000 books. And these light bulbs cost just over $1 a piece. And then they were gonna have to be specially installed too by the printer. So there was a lot of work in that. So a lot of our budget was exhausted by just these light bulbs. And very, very little was left for printing. And mind you, I was working at Fisher, and they had this reputation of always winning awards for their annual reports. So I had no pressure to where I'm like, okay, what am I going to do so that I can make this an award-winning annual with the little money that I have left and my skills? So I challenged myself to create the best book possible out of the most mundane tools possible. I purposely chose two non-colors, warm gray and black, and I chose 3 typefaces, very basic ones: Garamond, Trade Gothic, Vectora. Vectora's is just a sans serif. And I designed this book, and it actually was my first piece that ever got into graphies. And it also ended up getting into AR 100 that year, and AR 100 at the time was this really prestigious annual report publication. So this next one is where I learned something new, and that's what made it fun for me. This is another annual report. I worked with Tim Bateman over at Prisma. I don't know if anyone ever worked with him, but I worked with him for years on all these annuals. And I found this sample, and it had such a beautiful finish on it. And I took it to him and I said, what did they do to make this surface happen on this paper? And it was actually at the time too when everybody was using uncoated paper. No one liked coated. And it was a coated surface, which I thought, wow, to make a coated surface seem cool, that's fun. So I showed him this sample, and he told me they were matte inks that achieved that sample probably. And I was like, I didn't even know that matte inks existed. They exist in CM, Y, and K. So, so I designed this whole book to, I also used a neon ink. This was my first time using a neon ink too. But I designed this entire book around creating the best design scenario possible for those matte inks. And then this one also actually earned a spot in graphies. And I don't know if I hadn't created a reason for myself to be so engaged in these projects, if the result would have been the same. But another client outside of annual report design. So I have a friend, she owns a Pilates studio. I do all the work for her. And we did a rebrand, and she wanted to infuse her new brand into the space. And when we walked through her space, she told me, she's like, I hate these windows. I put curtains over them, I try to cover them, but if the curtains cover the window entirely, it's too dark in here, but I don't know what to do with them, I just hate them. So whatever you do, just make it so that I don't notice them. So game on. I took that challenge, and I said to myself, I'm like, I'm gonna make her love those windows. And with our small budget, actually, we just put this is all done with frosted clear vinyl. And the openings in them is where the cutouts are, and that's where you can see the light come through. These windows are now her favorite part of her studio. So that was a total win for me. That made it fun for me. It's also all of her instructors who like to post pictures of themselves doing things on the reformers in the studio. They also tend to, the windows during different times of the day, they look stunning with the light coming through, so they always have their pictures taken in front of them. And so these windows have become an integral part of her brand. Just a random couple other things that we did for her. We called her bathroom sit stands. We created a retail space for her. I also do all of her retail design there and her merch. Another before and after of another space, she had this wall in the back of the room. She said that this, where I'm standing, is generally where they stand when they try to take pictures, so that they can post them to promote things. And so we just created this artwork on the back of the wall, and it's really become a mantra for everyone at the studio. So not every project has a big budget. You might be thinking, well, it's super easy to make the work fun when you have the money to do whatever you want. Not every project does. And these folks, they're out in Show Low. It's just a menu for a restaurant that's called The Cabin. And they wanted to have a menu that they could print in-house. And so really the only budget was for the design. So I just told myself I was going to make it into a super fun type assignment. And rules are, use 3 typefaces at most. I used 6 or 7. And I made it into this really fun project that I had a lot of fun doing. My point here is that I've had a lot of young designers come to me and say, when I want to push back on the design or on the strategic thinking or wherever they're going with it, but it's just a bleh. Nothing's ever just a bleh, because if it is, then you're feeling bleh about it. Make it into something that is exciting for you. Make it fun. You'll be more passionate and get into that flow state a lot quicker and actually be excited to go get away and work on it if you find a way to engage in the work beyond the client's ask. Ask something of yourself. So to recap, how can we find flow? Shut it down, embrace the ebb, don't compare, and make it fun. And now I'll leave you with this. Be water, my friends.
Thank you, Gigi. Okay, so we have time for a couple of questions for Gigi. So if you have any questions about flow, about how the heck she wakes up at 4:30 in the morning, we need to get you that shirt that says
I'm a morning person.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Also, I'm just gonna fix this. That was kind of bothering me. Sorry, everyone. Or whatever. We'll just leave it. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Gigi about flow?
Oops.
No questions.
Can you talk a little bit about like your creative process? Just how you get started on the project?
Oh, yes.
Will you repeat the question?
Yes. He asked me to talk a little bit about how I get started on a project. I try to immerse myself in the space. It's those 3 days. That's what you're talking about. I try to immerse myself in the space of where I'm going. And I say that in terms of, I look at work that is within the same area of maybe how we want things to look, but then I also look at work that's totally in a different area. For example, I have a client right now, and this is a really great example, but I'm just in the early stages, and so I couldn't show the work, but they are in aerospace, and she said to me, she said, but our subject matter is really dry. And what happens if we do all this strategic thinking and we figure out that we don't have a story? And that was me saying, game on. I'm gonna make you feel like you have a story, because you do. Everybody has a story, you just have to ask the right questions. And it's gonna look not dry, because if it only looks dry, then you're not doing it right. So I had to go and kind of immerse myself in things that were actually outside of the space. And for this client in particular, I was inspired by fashion, because their differentiator happens to be her. She's brilliant and very put together. And I said to myself, I was like, how would Tom Ford or Hermes marry with aerospace? What would that look like? So my creative process is a little bit kooky, but I try to take myself into the space and then way out of the space and figure out how all that can sort of come together, because if you only take yourself into the space, then you're looking like really like everybody else in the space. You have to be aware of it so that then you can take yourself out and look individual and bring attention to your client.
Great question. What I heard from that was, let's go to the mall. Let's go shopping.
Let's do that.
Yes.
Yeah, do you believe that there is such thing as like a flow fatigue? Like if you're in flow for so long in so many different areas of life, do you burn out from your flow, or is that something that keeps you going and then you find areas where you can fall back into the ebb to get you going again?
So that's a good question, and that kind of actually is because of the thing that we said where your flow is always kind of sitting here right next to you. Now, I think that Mihai guy, he has this chart. I think you should watch his TED Talk. He has this chart, and it talks about how flow is this optimal space where the challenges are only at a certain point, and we're doing something that we love, and it was challenges versus skill. Challenges versus skill. It's a chart like this, and if your challenges are too high, if your skill level is too low, then you're going to get frustrated and you're not in flow. And if your challenges are too low and your skill level is super high, you're going to get bored. So again, you're not in flow. So maybe what you're talking about is when you're actually not flowing, you know? So do I believe that you can get overflowed? I think I do. I do, but that's because it's this truly when you do all this looking into what people think of as flow state, it's really a state. It's not something that it's a state, and for us as creatives, if we think of ourselves like water, it's next to us all the time. We're not in it all the time. So you might have to actually get out of it if you're feeling burnt out. Or, not force yourself to try and be, get up, go to a bookstore, do something that's outside of what you're doing. And if you're talking in relation to work and you're feeling burnt.
Great question. We have time for one more. Does anyone else have questions about flow?
One of the things I heard in a lot of what you were sharing was that you're working a lot of the time with limitations, whether that's budget or design or desires of the client. I'm curious what your thoughts are about the relationship between flow and limitations.
Yes, she's curious about limitations, not if I'm repeating you correctly, what the relationship between what the limitations are and finding flow. So, is that correct? The limitations are actually what drive me. I don't know why. But when someone says, you can't spend a lot of money, so it's gonna look boring. And then I say, no, it's not. I'm just gonna pour my heart and soul into making it over here in a very inexpensive way look amazing. I have to do that for myself. Or if it has to happen, what were the couple other limitations that you had mentioned?
Budget, client desires.
Oh, client desires. Client desires, again, it's a collaboration. If the client says something, part of it is understanding how to manage that conversation and keep it moving it in a direction where what you're creating for them is still effective, and yet still what you know about your business is going to set them apart from others. But the limitations are actually what drive me. I don't really want anyone to tell me that I can't do anything. I'm always going to make it, I'm always going to do my best to make it look cool in spite of you or whatever you told me. But quite honestly, the collaboration actually, it makes it a lot better. So many times I go back to my office and I think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this ask? And maybe what their ask is, when you talk to someone in a meeting, they're trying to solve for the ask. And that's fine if you want to have that conversation, but really what you need to go back and do is not necessarily just answer to what they're solving. Go back and figure out how you would solve it, because you're the person they hired to do this job. You're the person that's the expert in this profession. So they just want to try and help by solving for the ask. But if we solve for the ask, sometimes what we wanted, what our personal goal was in it as artists or whatever, it still can align with what the business goals are and what the client goals are. And the client's input makes it better, because then it's more effective in their space. Any others? Did that answer your question? Okay.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.